What's up, everybody? How you doing? Welcome to the top 5 of the great sax battle of the saxes. It's been quite an exhausting project. Over 150 in total over the course of the month. It's been a lot of work, but it's been fun, and I've learned a lot. I feel like I just got a degree in jazz saxophone. I hope you guys have all enjoyed it and learned as much as what I have. Number 5 on the list, the mystery is going to wind down. Lester Young, Prez. Lester's a special guy. The sun was really bright, so we got to change our configuration a little bit this time. Lester was from Woodsville, Mississippi, the Deep South, born on August 27, 1909. He, as a young boy, shined shoes and sold newspapers, learned how to hustle. He moved to New Orleans as a young boy. He early on had this understanding that he wanted to play music. He got his first trumpet at the age of 10. He played with the Blue Devils, led by Walter Page, who also had Count Basie and a few other luminaries of the time. In '33, he goes to Kansas City. Kansas City's scene is kind of exploding. As I've said before, there's a lot of vice, prostitution, brothels, swing bands were everywhere, booze was everywhere during Prohibition. All the jazz musicians were attracted there. He starts playing with Basie, and he has an off and on relationship with Basie for years. He's playing some clarinet on the side with the Basie small groups. He does some recordings with the KC7, which is a group of Basie's men that are pretty outstanding. He works with Billie Holiday, 37 to 41, doing some great recordings with her. And he'll come back to her later in his life, but these two have a simpatico that's really quite powerful, and one of the great empaths of jazz is watching Lester Young and Billie Holiday speak back and forth. It's kind of a spiritual thing almost. He goes back to Basie again. He gets drafted at the age of 34 in 1943, and they refuse to let him play in the bands. And the biographer was even saying how the white musicians would get drafted and go into army bands and entertain at the USOs and at the army bases. They refused to let him even bring a saxophone. He was straight put in the ranks at the age of 34. That's pretty old to be drafted. He gets out, goes to New York City. He starts hanging around Lady Day again. She's the one actually who nicknamed him Prez, and he nicknamed her Lady Day. He gets charged for weed, court-martialed in the army, and that's one of the reasons why he ends up serving a year in jail for smoking weed in the army and not protesting it. And he serves his year, gets out with honorable discharge. Like I said, he goes back to New York. He starts working with Norman Granz at the Philharmonic in the late 40s. He starts drinking heavily, and through the late 50s it starts taking his toll, and his health really declines. In '57, he joins Basie for a reunion, and then he's doing the CBS special, The Sound of Jazz, and he reunites with Billie Holiday on this show. And she's frail and in her last years, and so is he, living in a hotel above 52nd Street, and they kind of reconnect across the room from each other, and you can feel them talking through his horn and through her words, speaking to him. It's this powerful moment, and tells you what jazz was really about, two old friends reconnecting. It's a beautiful moment. Lester Young's career kind of bridges the same era as the Dexter Gordon's, where it goes through the 78 era into the LP era. They record sporadically and don't make as much music in that era because you're making 3-4 songs at a time, not albums worth of stuff. He gets into the early LP era, does a few things with Verve, a few things with Norman Granz, Clef, and then he passes. So most of the stuff's going to be collections of stuff he records earlier on, and the stuff he does with Billie Holiday is also really of note. We're listening to The President Plays with Oscar Peterson Trio 8144, probably from 56, 57 era. This is a 12068, some Savoy recordings from the late 40s, 12071, more Savoy recordings from that same era. This is the President's Blue on the Parker label. This one, I think it's on Pablo actually, Prez. which is obviously from much before that period. Lester Young, President's Very Best. It says 1965, but he was passed by then for a long time. And this is some stuff he does with Nat Cole. Around the time he starts working with Billie Holiday, he also starts doing some stuff with Nat Cole. And so he's having some success crossing over into white audiences at that point. And Lester's creamy tone, you know, he plays in the upper registers of the tenor saxophone, almost to the point where you would be fooled into thinking that he plays alto. He plays high in the range all the time, and he's one of the most brilliant tenor saxophone players. He's very different than Coleman Hawkins. Hawkins is kind of fierce and aggressive and bright, and Lester's very melancholy and smooth and cool, and that defines Lester Young. He's one of the most important cats of that era, and he's always worth the listen and digging into. That moves us on to number 4 on the list, and the great Sonny Rollins. And Rollins is a true genius. He's one of the great innovators of the early 50s, part of the hard bop scene, working with Miles, with Monk. He's kind of a rival of Coltrane's in some way. But it was always kind of a friendly rivalry, you know? It never felt like it was an ugly distrust or dislike. Sonny Rollins was born September 7, 1930. I do a longer episode on him if you want more of the detailed minutiae of his childhood and upbringing. But he's a New York City guy. He grows up playing with guys like Kenny Drew. Where to go here? Jackie McLean and Art Taylor. This is in his high school days. This is the kids he's hanging out playing with. He early on starts playing with J.J. Johnson, Fats Navarro, Bud Powell, Max Roach, and some really early important recordings. Like I said, he starts working with Miles and Monk. He's on some of their early recordings. He gets arrested for armed robbery and does 8-10 months in jail in Rikers Island in New York. Comes out, starts messing around with heroin. He gets arrested again, serves some more time. He gets out, joins Miles Quintet briefly, works with the Modern Jazz Quartet, works with Charlie Parker a little bit. He's kind of all over the place. On Miles' Bags Groove album, he gets to do 3 songs of his own, Aragon, Doxy, and Oleo, and those all become standards of the jazz world. That was with Horace Silver. He also works with Clifford Brown and Max Roach at one point. And he's a brilliant, innovative player that takes a few jazz cliches. He takes a few sabbaticals. You know, he goes to the West Coast for a while. He's sitting on the bridge playing, practicing his horn. He's got these cliches that a lot of people think of as the jazz world being, and Rollins is kind of that guy with the mohawk, blowing at the club, playing these long, fun, full of life solos. When he was on fire. He would quote songs from other places in his music, and just was a really brilliant free spirit. And like I said, I have a longer episode on his upbringing. If you guys want to delve into that, feel free to check that out. We'll move through his records here because most of you guys are going to know Rollins pretty well. This is some early Modern Jazz Quartet stuff, and it's not actually the MJQ. It's Rollins with Kenny Drew, Percy Heath, and Art Blakey, Miles Davis, Percy Heath, Roy Haynes. It's an interesting set. This record is 7038 on Prestige right here, and this is outstanding stuff. This is basically Clifford Brown, Max Roach under Rollins' name on Prestige. Clifford, Max, Richie Powell, George Morrow. You know, that's after Harold Land left. Rollins is in the group. They do a record under Rollins' name. This is fire. Tenor Madness is a record that he works on with, I think it's Coltrane. Yeah, Coltrane, Red Garland, Philly Joe Jones, Paul Chambers. Early Prestige, 7047. This is the stuff with Monk and Kenny Dorham, 7058. Some of the stuff's going to be early 50s, some of it's going to be 55, 56. All this early Prestige stuff is from 52, 53, 54, 55, in that all intermingled, but it's all being released on the 7000 series as the LP comes around in 55. In 56, he records this fantastic Saxophone Colossus. It's kind of the record he's known for more than anything else. It's absolutely brilliant. Blue 6 is wonderful on here. Blue 7, sorry. You Don't Know What Love Is. St. Thomas is absolutely one of his famous tracks. It's a perfect jazz record from that moment in time. This is a later edition of Rollins Plays for Bird. I'd like to get the original cover at some point, but it's that record from about 1956, 95 was the word it came out originally. Tour de Force, Sonny Rollins. I think he actually might have moved on to Riverside by the time this came out, but 71-26 and 72-07, Sonny Boy. Prestige had quite a bit of tapes of him. They kept putting him out, and that's a reissue of some early stuff on Prestige. He moves to Blue Note in 57, and this 1542, Sonny Rollins, that's an outstanding record. He's got some real force and fire here. Rollins is a pretty influential figure at this point. He's playing with most of the greats in the New York scene. He's playing, you know, with the Coltranes, the Miles, the Monks, the Horace Silvers, just about everybody and anybody who was somebody. Rollins spent some time with them. J.J. Johnson, Horace Silver, Monk, Paul Chambers, and Art Blakey, 1558. He has 4 records on Blue Note, all 56, 57. It's Not the Village Vanguard, 1581 is a famous record. Hard driving. It's just a trio, if I recall. No, it's a quartet. Wilbur Ware, Elvin Jones, Pete LaRocca is on some of it actually, and Donald Bailey's on the bass. It's interesting. I forgot Pete LaRocca was on some of that. And then 4001, the second record in the 4000 series, is Nuke's Time. And of course, Nuke is a reference to the great Brooklyn Dodgers pitcher, Don Newcomb, who people often mistook him for. They do have a striking resemblance, and he'd often get into a cab and have people think that it was Don Newcomb. So his nickname became Nuke. Then he moves to Riverside. He does The Sound of Sunny, 241. And then this Freedom Suite, 258, was a powerful charged record that put a lot of people on notice. And it includes this statement on the back, which I'm going to read briefly. America's deeply rooted in Negro culture. Its colloquialisms, its humor, its music. How ironic that the Negro, who more than any other people can claim America's culture as his own, is being persecuted and repressed. That the Negro, who has exemplified the humanities in his very existence, is being rewarded with inhumanity. That's a bit of a throwing down the gauntlet. You know, that's a bit of putting your career in the line, saying, I have a bit of a platform right now. I feel like this injustice is more than I can handle some days. This was, of course, just a Jazzland reissue of that first Riverside I showed you. This is an outtake from some stuff on Metro Jazz that Verve ends up getting. Sonny Rollins Brass. It's with a big band. I think Thad Jones is in this, Clark Terry, a lot of people. He goes on a Metro Jazz label originally, and then Verve reissues it. He goes out west and he records this record in California, way out west, playing kind of fun songs from that ilk, playing with West Coast musicians Shelly Manne, Ray Brown, Sonny Rollins, and it's light, it's a little frivolous, but it's playful and shows you the dimensions of Mr. Rollins. That's an older pressing of it that I found. This is the second record on Contemporary, a little bit different in temperature with Barney Kessel, Hampton Hosley, Roy Vinegar, and Shelly Manne, but it's still a little bit lighter being on the West Coast. And then he takes another sabbatical. He goes away for 5 years, and they say that he can be seen every day out on the Queensboro Bridge or the East River, watching that stinky water flow underneath him. 1959, 58, 60, he's out there playing the saxophone every day, subway, trains rolling by, and people would hear him. And there's Sonny Rollins. No one's seen him at a club for years. No one's heard him record for years. He gets talked out of retirement in 1960 by RCA, one of the big dogs. And he makes this record, The Bridge, and it's fantastic. It had the budget of a big label behind it, and he was rejuvenated, he felt fresh, I think some of Coltrane's developments were a challenge to him, and he wasn't sure what direction he wanted to go. Do you follow what someone else is doing? Do you find your own path? And I think he just went up the mountain and talked to the demon and said, where is my soul? Where's my path? And he didn't come down until he was ready. And he has 5 or 6 records here at RCA in the early 60s that have a range from a little more commercial, like the Bossa Nova one's a little bit lighter. Standard Sonny Rollins is good. The one with Coleman Hawkins is outstanding. Now's the Time. Sonny Rollins, Our Man in Jazz. And this is the one with Coleman Hawkins, Sonny Meets Hawk, the originator of the great tenor saxophone sound. What's New? Sonny Rollins Brings Jazz is a new rhythm from South America. That's the Bossa Nova one as that craze was taking over. And this is just a later pressing of the bridge from a much later photo of him that I first had the bridge at for years. He used Impulse to make some pretty impressive records there. East Broadway Rundown on 65 is some fantastic post-bop, post-hard bop even. It's compositional, it's complex, it's passionate, he feels very connected. This Alfie soundtrack is outstanding. Sonny Rollins Impulse, A91, these are all for probably 1965. These are fantastic Sonny Rollins at his kind of fiery best. And then this is some earlier outtakes from Clifford Brown. This is I think it's actually the same record with a different cover. They tricked me. And that's just a collection right there. And this was actually his first one on Prestige. It ended up on the bottom because I was showing this in a different episode. This is Work Time, 70-20. This has on it Max Roach, Ray Bryant, and George Morrow. And Rollins was truly one of the giants of this music. You know, he deserves a lot of recognition. Number 3 on the Great Jazz Countdown of the saxophone is the great Coleman Hawkins. And I tempted to put him 1, but for reasons, I'm moving him to number 3. It leaves us, obviously, with only 2 options for 1 and 2. And the other 2 great innovators of this instrument. And Coleman's the first one. He's the guy who takes the saxophone from obscurity and makes it the horn of the music. You know, and it becomes the sound of jazz over the next 50 years, the saxophone. And there's not a saxophone player out there that doesn't have some Coleman Hawkins in them. You know, and in the day, in the swing eras, when he's playing with Fletcher Henderson, it's him, Ben Webster, and Lester Young that are dictating the sound of this instrument. And he was the blustery, full-toned, fiercest of the bunch. Lester was the smooth, creamy upper register, and Ben Webster was the breathy, ballad-playing, debonair, swanky. His breathy tone is just, it makes you lose your breath. It's insane. I love Ben Webster. Coleman Hawkins is a product of the Kansas City area, along with Ben Webster, along with Charlie Parker. He's actually from St. Joseph, Missouri, just up the road. And he grows up in the great swing towns of Kansas City, like Lester Young, like Charlie Parker. And he's a part of all those great bands. He's innovating and changing the music. But what really innovated and changed him was his time with Louis Armstrong. And he's playing with Fletcher Henderson first. Plays with Armstrong for a while. And Armstrong kind of blew his mind and reshaped for him how he could approach his instrument and inflect his personality, demand you notice me. And if you only give me 8 bars, I got to make you remember my name. And Armstrong had that every time he played. And Coleman Hawkins became that on the tenor saxophone. By all accounts, a gentleman of a fella, just a sweet fella that was always supportive of his fellow musicians. He seems one of the most genuine people in the music. His version of Body and Soul here was the first inkling of the changes coming. He states the original melody about Body and Soul in the beginning, and then just improvises on it through the rest of the song. And that's the door opening for bebop. And he's always there with the innovators. And the first bebop recordings, he was actually a part of it. Sorry, I reversed a couple orders there, so I started reading the wrong one. He ends up going to Europe for a while, from 34 to 39, and is tearing the house down across the ocean. He comes back and does Body and Soul, changes music forever. And like I say, he's always part of the innovation of the music. And in 44, the first bebop recordings after the recording ban was ended. Bebop starting in 41, 42 in Harlem at the clubs up there, but no one's recording it. And in 44, the first bebop track recorded was with Dizzy Gillespie, Don Bias, Clyde Hart, Oscar Pettiford, Max Roach, and Coleman Hawkins. His recordings for Sad Boy in the late 40s are absolutely beautiful. He ends up working with Norman Granz and the Jazz at the Philharmonic for a long time, and his recordings for Verve, and then eventually onto Prestige and Riverside, all the Moodsville, Swingsville stuff. You just really get a sense of how important this guy is, even through the 50s and 60s. He goes to Impulse and makes 4 records there. So let's dig through his discography real quick. This is some RCA release documenting his stuff from the 30s, including the great Body and Soul track. This is a 10-inch on Emersy. It's called The Beam, 26013, and it's with Roy Eldridge, Bobby Wilson, Billy Taylor on the bass, and Cozy Coles on the drums. I snatched that up when I saw that. That was a fun little find. This is The Hawk Returns, 12013 on Savoy, and that's going to be stuff from the late 40s as well. I'm going to throw that on. You can see it's already a little more modern sounding. This is some Imperial stuff actually recorded in 47 with Howard McGee, and Miles Davis shows up on a couple tracks in here back in 1947. This is The Hawk Flies High from mid-50s on RCA. They're putting out stuff from the vaults and they're bringing them in to record. This is on Capitol, The Gilded Hawk. Now this is stuff from Verve now, and this stuff is great. Coleman Hawkins with Roy Eldridge, Pete Brown, and Joe Jones at Newport, probably 1957. Coleman Hawkins and Colin Frères with Ben Webster, Roy Eldridge, the Oscar Peterson Trio. These records are outstanding. Hawkins, Eldridge, and Hodges, like just royalty on these records. Coleman Hawkins comes alive at the Village Gate. Fantastic stuff. This is just a Verve collection that he puts out. And this is his Riverside record, The Hawk Flies High. This is an awesome record. Beautiful, just lyrical stuff. He's telling you stories. He's the great storyteller of the saxophone. Idris Suleiman's on the trumpet, J.J. Johnson's on the trombone, the great Hank Jones, Barry Galbraith's on the guitar, Oscar Pettiford, and Joe Jones. What a great group. This is on Prestige 7199, and his late 50s small group stuff on Riverside and Prestige, Soul Eyes, Hawkeyes. These records are outstanding. He makes, I think, 5 or 6 records for Prestige Swingsville and 5 or 6 records for Prestige Moodsville. The Swingville stuff's going to be bluesy, up-tempo party music. The Moodsville stuff's going to be more down-tempo, chill-out music. So just like a label today might have up-tempo party mixes and down-tempo chill, Jazz did the same thing. So Prestige had these 2 separate series so that you wanted to have a party, you put on the Swingsville stuff. This is with the All-Stars. This one's with Red Garland Trio. But if you wanted to chill out, you went to the Moodsville stuff. This is Stosh, Swingsville 2013. The Hawk Returns. This is Moodsville 2016. This one's Things Ain't What They Used to Be 2024. This one's with Tiny Grimes, Ray Bryant 2035. So that's 6 Swingsville. Now this is Moodsville stuff. Moodsville 7 at Ease. One of the best records I have. I've played that endlessly. Coleman Hawkins, again, the Hawk Relaxes, Moodsville 15. No Strings, Moodsville 25. For like someone, make someone happy from Do Re Mi. He's taking Broadway stuff and making it just wonderful to listen to. The Broadway scene, playing America's Greatest Jazz Men. They're taking Broadway hits and making them danceable, partyable, sexable. You know what I'm saying? This is now he goes to the Impulse here, and his stuff with Impulse here with Duke Ellington is absolutely gorgeous. He does this Bossa Nova record here, Impulse A28. That's absolutely outstanding. Beautiful, contemporaneous with the Stan Getz stuff. It's brilliant stuff. Today and Now, A34, great impulse. And then Rap Tight comes a little bit later. This is some actually edgier, on the edges stuff. It's really outstanding. This is some stuff on the Crown label, more on the Crown label, stuff that they were putting out in the 50s that they got the rights to. And then this is just an outtake on the Portrait label. So that's the great Coleman Hawkins. That moves us to number 2 on the list. And number 2 on the list is the great Charlie Parker. And once again, we're back in Kansas City. He's a Kansas City. He's a Kansas City born and raised guy. Played with Jay McShann, played with Count Basie. He's playing in that whole scene with the brothels and the vice and the money. The money's the root of all of it. Without the money, the rest of it doesn't matter. There was money because of the corruption, and that brings the vice and the drugs and the music. And these guys were all absolutely lured to the lights and the money of Kansas City. Parker is the great revolutionary in jazz, and he doesn't intentionally change the music. He's doing what he feels. It feels very genuine. It's not innovation because I'm trying to innovate. It's I've played so much that I accidentally did. And he's a flamboyant player. He abandons the chord structure and only improvising on the intervals of the chords, and starts using the entire scales and adding all the alternative steps, allowing solos to be these long flowing, rhythmic but still melodic, but abandoning the original melody. You know, they abandon the melody. They might state it in the beginning, but then they're just going to take those chords and basically just jump through loops all throughout the scales, and it really changed what soloists could do. And like I said, I don't think Parker was consciously trying to change the music. He was just trying to free himself to play what he felt. And it feels very organic and very natural with Parker. He's born on August 29, 1920 in KC, like I said. At 3 to 4 years old, for 3 to 4 years, you say he's practicing 15 hours a day. Sorry, I read that wrong. He plays with Basie, he plays with Benny Moten. He plays Buster Smith in the Benny Moten group. And Buster Smith was the one who had these dynamic transitions rhythmically where he would all of a sudden play and then go to double time and triple time. And that illuminated Parker. You had that rhythmic innovation with the melodic and harmonic innovations of bebop. Parker starts to change the world. He meets Dizzy Gillespie at one point here. He gets into a bad car crash, breaks a few ribs, becomes hooked on opioids, and ends up being a bad heroin habit. And he poisons himself into an early grave. And it's really one of the tragedies of jazz. 39, he goes to New York City, and he's washing dishes at a club where Art Tatum is playing. And Art Tatum, in some ways, innovated some of the things Parker innovates much earlier. Tatum was flying through scales in a lot of his improvisations that were just mind-numbingly intricate and ornate. He's doing these long arpeggios up and down the keyboard, and there are people who say that in some ways Tatum is one of the progenitors of bebop. And so here's Parker as a broke junkie washing dishes at a club in New York, listening to Art Tatum every night fly up and down the keyboard with one eyeball shut and the other one half open, barely seeing the thing. Art Tatum was changing the shit. And here's young Parker, who's already been working on the changes, hearing this guy night after night. And I think a light turned on for him with the Buster Smith rhythm, the new harmonic melodic ideologies, and then hearing Tatum night after night breaking all the rules himself. It just, the floodgates open, he kind of says. He starts working with Dizzy again in the Earl Hines group, with Monk, Charlie Kirshner, and Kenny Clark. And at one point, he's known to have said, we wanted to play music that they couldn't play. And that they he's talking about is the white people. And black rappers have been known to say they want to say things that they don't want white kids being able to repeat and sing along to. The N-word was used a lot for that reason, to try to keep their music. Blue Note, some of those records like the Back at the Chicken Shack and some of those Boogaloo tracks that were openly soul food referenced and really Afrocentric, it was meant to send a message. This is our music. And so Parker and the whole bebop crew has to be resentful of what I was talking about earlier yesterday, and the fact that there's thousands of white guys out there making a living on this music, and we can barely pay our bills. We can barely find work. The big bands have broken up. The money of that era is gone. No one can afford to keep a big band together. And there's white cats getting jobs and work everywhere. Every bar mitzvah, every anniversary, every party, they're hiring white bands to play for their white parties because they don't dare hire black musicians. And it had to be exhausting and somewhat resentful at times to hear your music making all this money everywhere and you couldn't make no money. I was doing some basement work today. I'm a little dusty. I apologize. So yeah, well, I'll show you Parker's work. This is a live track from 41, 42 era, before the recording band, with Cootie Williams, Trummy Young, Don Bias, Jay McShann, Clyde Hart, Gene Raby. Some outstanding young players are on that. I'm going to show you his Savoy era. And Savoy era pretty much starts right after the war. And I've shown you these records a few times, but he has a lot of stuff in the 12,000 series, is the endless vaults of stuff that Lubinsky recorded of him with all kinds of talented sidemen, documenting something that even the racist kind of pig that Lubinsky was knew was revolutionary. And there's just a lot of Savoy stuff that they put out album after album in the mid 50s and late 50s, but none of this is from that era. It's all from an earlier 40s era. And these are even a couple later Savoy records called Encore Volume 1 and 2, and they're essentially alternate takes of some of this other stuff here. So it's pretty non-ending. This is Charlie Parker, the very best of, from 47, another collection. This is something I just got recently. I found it for a really great price. And it's a 6-record set of the Charlie Parker Dial stuff. And there's some outstanding versions of the Dial stuff on here, all the alternate takes. I was pretty stoked to finally come across that. It's a tough thing to find nowadays, and it was only $40, so I had to buy it. He does some stuff for Roost in 47, and Teddy Reed is recording him and hearing what him and Gillespie are doing. Here's another little roulette later thing, some of Gillespie's stuff with Parker. More stuff, echoes of an era. This is some of the stuff he does with Miles in 47, 48. This is a concert from 49. After he passes, Bird's so legendary that anything that anybody had gets put out. And Parker was such a giant that musicians were showing up at clubs with tape recorders in their pockets, recording him, trying to go home and practice what he was doing. And after he dies, it leads to a lot of really shitty recordings of Charlie Parker being issued on vinyl. This Bird on 52nd Street, this Bird at St. Nick's, pretty low fidelity quality recordings, but the guy was such an innovative icon in this kind of nebulous turnover and turmoil of the early 50s, late 40s, that people just put out what they could find. This is on the Charlie Parker label that comes out later. Now, Norman Granz stuff, he starts tracking with Norman Granz in the early 50s. Jazz at the Philharmonic, some of that stuff he's on. But Norman Granz tries to document late Parker the best he can. Parker's ill. He's falling in and out of consciousness. A lot of drinking when he's not high. His habit's bad. He's stealing people's instruments. But Norman Granz is still recognizing this guy needs to be documented. And he puts out a number of recordings on Clef and Norgran. And the first 10 releases on Verve, the 8000 series starting in 55, it's all Charlie Parker stuff. That's 3. That was number 1. That was number 2. Number 4, Night and Day, Parker and his Orchestra, Charlie Parker. This is April in Paris with strings. That's I think that's number 5. Number 6 is Now's the Time. It's just a pretty endless stream out here. Fiesta, Parker and his Orchestra, 8008. The first 10 releases, Park and Diz, it's all Parker stuff. Swedish Schnapps, another one, 8010. And right about the time the LP era comes around, Parker passes. And Parker passes in 55, and Clifford Brown passes early in 56, leaving the jazz world kind of shattered, looking for a new direction. And a lot of people were going to try to step up into that vacuum. And there was a kind of who's going to be the guy? And a lot of people needed the throne, but it's really curious as who really claims it. The Everest label puts out a bunch of outtakes and early stuff. It's a convoluted discography, try to get to know. But for the most part, Norman Granz, Dial, Savoy, there's a few labels as well document his stuff. But most of it's pre-LP era, and I guess, like I said, it's a tough thing to get to master. But that's Parker, leaving us to number 1 on the list. And there's no mystery in anybody's eyes here as to who number 1's going to be at this point. The great John Coltrane. And I waffled a little bit on who I wanted to make number 1, but Coltrane becomes it for numerous reasons. And behind Coleman Hawkins and Charlie Parker, he's probably the 3rd most innovative guy on the saxophone. And he is born from Hamlet, North Carolina. He works his way north to Philadelphia, plays with Jimmy Heath for a while. He plays in groups with Earl Bostic. He's playing with Johnny Hodges a little bit. He plays with Dizzy Gillespie's big band for a little while. Then he starts working with Miles. Miles calls him up from Philadelphia in 55. And that kind of changed his trajectory. Playing with Bostic, it's kind of an R&B shout crossover, Louis Jordan kind of thing almost. And playing with Miles was going to be more of a modern hard bop. And he comes up to New York, and he just kind of sets the world on fire. And he's kind of the messiah to a lot of people, even to a lot of fellow jazz players. He plays, of course, with Miles on the great First Quintet. And that first record, plus the 4, Cookin' Stephen Workin' Relaxin', plus the early stuff on Columbia, it's some of the high water marks in jazz history. And the polar energy of the acerbic, minimal, negative Miles Davis, countered by the bright, positive, never wanting to be quiet Coltrane. Coltrane's endless in his ideations. Miles has 3 things to say and I'm done. And Miles often wondered, if I get off the stage and let Coltrane play, will he ever stop playing? You know? And Coltrane once asked him, I don't know how to stop playing. And Miles said, put your horn down. Just put it down. But Coltrane always had another idea he wanted to run through real quick. And he's just a never-ending quest to try to find atonement, to try to find salvation in the music. There's a real spiritual element to him, almost a prophetic, messianic feel to his 60s stuff where he's just on this quest. He goes to some pretty ugly places at times, trying to fight the darkness and the fear and his own mortality. He knew he was dying. He starts making the edges of the music come to life. He hears Ornette Coleman. He plays with like Eric Dolphy. The avant-garde starts creeping in, and he really starts to change the music in a lot of ways. He starts off with his own solo works here in Prestige, and known as the Sheets of Sound. And it was kind of inspired by Parker, but it was just these really fast flurries and blistering walls of endless notes. And he has a lot of great records on Prestige. And after he leaves Prestige and and moves on to Atlantic and even on to Impulse, Prestige is still finding sessions that Coltrane led back in '57 and putting it under his name back in 1965 like it was some new Coltrane. He was really capitalized on by Prestige a lot, long after he left. And they did that with Miles too. You know, they did it with Monk too. Prestige is pretty. Bob Weinstock doesn't have a problem making $1. You know, that's what he was there to do. But he makes these records at Prestige, and his stuff with Red Garland to me is fantastic. And for me, my favorite Coltrane is when he's playing with Red Garland. It's almost like Red Garland's a father figure to him, and there's a beautiful, controlled respect. And he plays from the blues. He's centered on the blues. And one of the reasons why I think he's the #1 guy is it's not just his innovation at all points, it's his integrity at all points. It never feels like he's doing all these great innovations just because he wants to put his name on something and look how innovative and original I am. It always feels like a very genuine, integral step for him to try to find the greatest sense of purity, release, atonement. It sounds like he's talking to the cosmos for all of us at times, seeking a repentance and Father, forgive them for they know not what they do. And it's racial in a lot of his makeup. He's got the element of Armstrong of the great forgiveness. And I don't want to be resentful. I want to try to find a way through to get a better tomorrow. And as the light starts closing at the end of the tunnel and he starts seeing his mortality, his music starts going out in that direction. But as far out as it is, it always feels very genuine and very full of integrity. And I feel like he's been one of the great luminaries in the last 50 years for the music, along with Miles. His reputation keeps jazz alive in new, young music consumers' heads. And his body of work is so immense. This pile of records back here, if you can see that, that's all John Coltrane. We're just going to blast through it. Most of you are going to know a lot of it. It's mostly from Prestige, one really famous Blue Note, a great string of Atlantic records, and a whole shit ton of stuff at Impulse, with a few other things sprinkled in. And let's just run through it, shall we? What, my dear? This is Training In from 71-23. The original cover of this is much cooler. It's with Red Garland. The original cover is black with like a red kind of design. I want to get that cover at some point, but again, you can only buy so many things for just the cover. Right, wife? So there you go. This is Wheelin' and Dealin' featuring Coltrane, Frank West, and Paul Kinnichet. 71-31. Hard record to come by. Frank West is great. Paul Kinnichet is great. This is Soul Train 71-42. This is with Coltrane and Paul Kinnichet again. And Paul Kinnichet's vice pres. We talked about him back in the 30s, I believe. 71-58. Great stuff. Lush Life. This is 71-88. Another outstanding Coltrane session. His developments are starting to happen here. This is the Sheets of Sound Time. Setting the Pace is from 1958. This doesn't come out till 61. So by now, these records are long after he left Prestige. 61 on that one as well. So I think Coltrane and Kinnichet is the last one that comes out while he's actually at Prestige. But we got a lot of Prestige to go. Standard Coltrane. Coltrane Stardust from 58 comes out in 63. Dakar, recorded in 57, comes out in 1963. I think that was under someone else's name originally, if I recall. Pepper Adams. This was originally Pepper Adams on that 16 RPM Prestige from 54. And he gets repackaged under Coltrane's name because he was the sideman on that. The Believer, John Coltrane, 72-92, recorded in 58, 1964. If it's on the Prestige label, it was recorded at 57 or 58, but it could come out at any time. This is from 58, released in 64, 58, released in 65, Bahia. The Last Train is from 57, released in 65. Coltrane Pays for Lovers, just a compilation. The First Train is a reissue of this. That's another way Prestige will get you. You'll be like, oh, the First Train, new Coltrane record, cool. Nope, just 7105, hitting you again. John Coltrane with two tenors with Hank Mobley. That's actually 7036 or whatever it is, the Elmo Hope record, reissued under Coltrane's name. The Master John Coltrane, a compilation. Kenny Burrell and John Coltrane, great stuff. He does a record with Burrell earlier that's really great. He's in my Burrell section. Some Paul Kiddushey and Mal Waldron stuff. Here's Blue Train. This is most people's introduction to Blue Train. Most people come to jazz through Miles Davis. Miles Davis teaches you about John Coltrane, and then you can't dig into John Coltrane too long before someone says to you, "Do you have Blue Train?" And then they're like, "Oh, that's the Blue Note record." And Blue Note has enough little legacy right now that everybody, this is their first Blue Note. And as famous as Blue Note is in legacy, to the average novice, when you first look at that Blue Note discography, it's kind of shocking how many of the greats, like you're like, I don't know most of these names. And it's that next tier, but they're all legends once you get to know them. Bags and Train with Milt Jackson. You get the feeling Milt Jackson's putting a bridle on Train here. You know, Milt's the blues, and he plays proper with John Lewis on the MJQ. When he's on his own, he wants to play from the gut. He wants to play them storytelling blues. This is from 60, released 61. My favorite things, of course, is one of the most iconic pieces in jazz. It's a really unlikely source for a hit, you know, to take a song from a musical like The Sound of Music and to turn it into a jazz, a ubiquitous song. It's omnipresent. You can be in a bookstore, a coffee shop, a shopping mall, and this version will come on of this, and it's peppy, it's light, and it's bright. He's playing a soprano saxophone, and it's just amazing how diverse Coltrane was, how many things he could do really well, and always with the highest degree of integrity. It always feels like it's so genuine and from the soul and from the heart, and that's the most important part of the music. All other definitions aside, how much do you mean it? That's what moves me. That's what stirs me. And with Coltrane, you never have to question that. Giant Steps is a record that shouldn't be as easy to listen to as it is. It's mathematically absolutely complicated what he's doing here. He's disseminating the numbers behind the music and doing these incredible giant looping numerical things, knowing the theory of the music so well that he can do it, practicing 14, 15 hours a day. And so they come up with this giant steps, this incredibly complex thing that kind of repeats that you have to be brilliant to do. And yet somehow it's completely listenable. It's counterintuitive. He finishes out his career with Atlantic, and like Prestige, even though he moves on to Impulse, Atlantic's going to be putting out stuff for a number of years after he moves to Impulse. So by the time he's on Impulse, you still got Prestige putting out a Coltrane record or two every year. Atlantic's going to put out a Coltrane record every year. And then Impulse is going to be putting out 2 or 3 Coltrane records every year. So the guy was just so omnipresent during this kind of golden final moment of the jazz world. This is with Don Cherry, and this is where he starts getting out. Cherry, of course, plays with Ornette for years, and that's where he starts diverging out. And even there's some dissonance and tension in that. Alternate takes, this is Atlantic alternate stuff, Atlantic best of, the Art of John Coltrane Atlantic collection. This is originally on United Artists, a Cecil Taylor record called, it's got the little car on the cover. I've tried to bid on that one a few times too, but again, I don't want to pay too much for a record I already got. But it's got that race car on the cover, Cecil Taylor. This is it being reissued under Coltrane's name. That's how big a name Coltrane was. This is the Bethlehem years. He's there briefly doing some tracks that I think actually from King. Dial Africa stuff. Tanganyika Strut is actually a release of the Bill Hardman record on Savoy that he was a sideman on. It gets re-released under Coltrane's name. And that's part of why his discography is so huge, is some of his side work ends up getting reissued under his name. So it's out there in 2 different formats often. Pablo in the 70s finds some Coltrane concert stuff to put out, because even Norman Granz and Pablo knows the importance of the great Coltrane groups. This is a live concert in '65 in Paris. Now we're gonna run through the Impulse stuff. We're gonna do it quick. It's a lot of stuff. He's the founding member. He's one of the real coups of the Impulse label. Creed Taylor convinces ABC to start Impulse, and they sign Coltrane away from Atlantic, and it's supposed to be a big deal. And Coltrane ends up getting a kind of a carte blanche to do what he wants, and that ends up being not exactly what Creed Taylor wanted. And Coltrane just decides to try everything. Africa Brasses with Eric Dolphy, important kind of direction-changing stuff. Live at the Village Vanguard, this of course has Chasing the Train on it. It's just frenetic. Dolphy's on this. It's relentless pursuit of hope. I need to keep climbing. I'm gonna keep fighting. I'm gonna keep working. I'm gonna try to get there. And that's part of the Coltrane experience. This is from '62, Coltrane. By this time, the great quartet's coming into being. A little more commercial is this Ballads record with the great quartet. This record with Duke Ellington is one of the most beautiful records in the history of the planet. In a Sentimental Mood, My Little Brown Book, Music to Die For, Impressions, beautiful record. It's got a bit of a more melancholy sound to it. This is live at Birdland, and the changes are starting to happen here with the quartet, but we're still in '63. And in '64 he does two very important records with the Love Supreme, which is actually etched into my wedding band. My dear wife suggested I should put a jazz song in there, so I etched the sound wave of a Love Supreme into my wedding band, right baby? A little lipstick to finish off my session. In '64 he does a Love Supreme and Crescent, and these are high water mark for Coltrane and the quartet. Hey guys, so I lost the ending of me and my wife's top 10 here, top 5, finishing out Impulse. Somehow moving the video, it got stuck in Never Never Land. I can watch it on my phone, but I can't do nothing with it. My phone died. We used her phone. She sent it to me. It disappeared from her phone, and I can't get it off my phone. So I'm going to do the ending by myself here. Just to recap, '64, Crescent, and A Love Supreme are kind of these pinnacles, high water marks, and the quartet has symbiotically merged into one being. It's a very empathetic thing listening to these four and the give and the take. And on some levels, the rhythm section has to do more of the giving, because Coltrane, this is Ray McCoy right there, Coltrane does a lot of the taking in terms of space taken up, because he's got a lot to say, a lot on his mind. And Elvin and McCoy, I think, start to long for more bluesy subject matter. And when they leave at the end of '65, you'll see the choices they make in their own LPs and as sidemen. It's to go very much back to the center. You know, Alvin, for all his enjoy pounding with that band, goes back to making pretty blues forward, straightforward jazz with Grant Greens and more of the center, like I said. But '64 is this moment, this pinnacle, where jazz has climbed the mountain. Coltrane's seen from the highest point the landscape. And I think it's also where his own ending becomes clearest to him, that he doesn't have forever. You know, the kidney, the pain, there was health issues that were creeping up. And he starts to push further out. And sometimes even fear, the unknown, can drive art into some strange places. And I think the accelerated experimentation that is absolutely at the highest velocity continuously for the next few years 64, 65, it's telling. He's trying to cram a lot of material and ideation and get it out of him. And I think Coltrane eventually would have come back to the blues as well. It's just so rooted in the culture, so rooted in the black community. And I don't think there's any way an artist of his background, as far as he goes into the avant-garde and the out, almost all musicians come full circle. That's the norm. The exception would be to not come back. That would be strange. This Live at Birdland Records, phenomenal tour de force. The quartets in great form. Again, we talked about Crescent and Love Supreme and just how important they were. This is Meditations, recorded in '65. Doesn't come out until '66. And there's another record called First Meditations, which I'll show you, which is a redoing of the same material with a slightly different group and fairly different results. This is Coltrane Quartet Plays, and Nature Boy on here is outstanding. Brazia is fantastic. It's even here, Chim Chim Cheree, redone by this band. It's a pretty radical departure. Kula Se Mama, again from '65, doesn't come out until '67. Has some wonderful African beats and meditations on it. You know, it seems to almost have an element of witchcraft. And that's kind of the thing Coltrane's saying, is Love Supreme, Crescent, from Allah to Buddha to Confucius, all the way through the Dharma. You know what I mean? It's a consistent religious texture across cultures that he's sewing together and saying, my African heritage, the European tradition, the American amalgamation of all this, it all still points back to one spirituality at some point. You know, and that's part of my belief system as well. But I think Train is recognizing that. You know, he's looking through the curtain, peering beyond the veil, and seeing that my creator shall remain nameless. I'm not going to label him with my small ideation and say I know him. I'm going to be in praise and awe of this creation that I'm a part of. But I'm not going to remove part of the fabric from the quilt. This must all be a part of his creation. And so my African roots, the Far East, the Middle East, the subcontinent, the European tradition, it must all seamlessly meld together into what the afterlife is going to be. It's not different for any of us. It's the same for all of us. And so maybe unity and peace on earth might help us move on to some of the greater questions in life. Om and Ascension represent probably his two farthest out experiments. They both require a dedicated listen. I think only the few will listen to these more than once or twice. The first time out of curiosity alone. The second time, boy, it was just a shit fucking day. Let me throw some pots and pans at the wall. No, I'll put on Coltrane Ascension instead. That'll cover my bases. That will extricate what I cannot speak right now. And really, his journey from there starts to wind down. This is Live at the Village Vanguard again. His wife is now in the mix. Pharoah Saunders is in the mix. Rashid Ali, I believe, is on the drums now. McCoy and Elvin have moved on to more blues-centered projects. Like I said, on some level, I feel like they probably had enough. You know, it was probably pretty exhausting following this man into the wilderness. You know, and your dedication and loyalty was forever abiding as we went through the cosmos and through this tangled web and explored the unexplored. But at some point, I think Elvin and McCoy longed for home. You know, we've been at space now for 4 years. We've seen some far distant galaxies. We've explored pretty far, John. And John knew that his path had to continue. And I think Farrell joining the group was for Elvin and McCoy almost like, okay, the quartet's no longer what it was. It can now be restructured. Rashid Ali comes in. And again, I get some of it from the things I've read. And some of the things that just you see from what McCoy and Elvin do after Coltrane. Neither of them really touch anything that far out again. You know, they both come very much back to the center. Expression is a great record. It's got his death on there. It comes out after he passed, recorded in '67. And most of what happens now is going to be stuff from '63 through '66 that comes out for the next 10 years. Cosmic Music from '66 comes out in '68. Selflessness, which has a live side from '63 and a studio track from '65. Live in Seattle, which is from '65, comes out in '71. '65 was this prolific year. And I think any musician would have been exhausted by playing any music as much as they did, and for it to be as intense and as draining and as full encompassing as this music was, on a cerebral, on a spiritual, on a physical level, it was probably an exhausting year. Again, from '65, released in '71, is the Sunship Sessions. This is Transition, which documents stuff from 1965 in the spring as the band was starting to make some changes sound-wise. Comes out in '70. Live in Japan, recorded in '66. Doesn't come out until '73. Impulse kind of capitalizes on his passing to some degree. Interstellar Space. This is with just him and Rashid Ali. Interesting interwoven fabric from '67, released in '74. This is Alternate Takes from Africa Brass with Dolphy from 1961, recorded in '74. And then this is that alternate version of Meditations. This is called First Meditations. And this was the versions they tracked first. And these are calmer, more serene. And I believe in the second meditation, Pharoah Saunders is on some of it. It's certainly more intense, I recall. I have to look. I just did an episode on '65 Coltrane, which is something you should watch if you're into Coltrane. Stellar Regions, it comes out in '95. It's from '67. Stardust Sessions on some Prestige outtakes. And most of what's going to be left here is going to be collections. This is more of the Village Vanguard stuff, which ends up becoming a 4 CD set at some point. The Best of Coltrane, just a compilation. This series is just a collection of alternate takes, vault tracks, and just some interesting stuff and worth having, and they're not that tough to come by. And then this is the Lost album from 2 years ago, again from '63, and it's not fully realized, I don't think, but it certainly is an interesting documentation of this great group at an interesting time in their history. And so Coltrane ends up being number 1 on the list. And it certainly wasn't an easy and a unanimous choice. Parker had a title claim. Hawkins has a claim. You know, I think those would be the 3 that would really have the most legitimate claim to the throne. But as much as Hawkins innovates, and as much as Parker innovates, Coltrane's body of work is so immense. It covers so many eras and sounds of the music. It goes from the blues and R&B into hard driving, hard bop, some of the most fierce playing of that era. The whole sheets of sound, just endless ideation, the numerical innovations of modality that Kind of Blue and Giant Steps brings about, which was innovative yet still accessible. Then he moves into the edges of the avant-garde, works with Dolphy, and starts diving further and further the spiritual aspect of the great quartet, and then some of the stuff that comes later again. And then the straight free avant stuff is so out there, but it just really gives you an incredible cross-section of most of the history of jazz. And he plays a ballad with the best of them. His record with Johnny Hartman is to die for. You know, it's a pretty complete package. He's certainly been an ambassador for jazz to non-jazz fans. Rock and roll people hear Coltrane and get it. By this time, white consumers do dominate jazz purchasing. You know, the black jazz audience has dwindled greatly from the 30s and 40s. And by the 50s, they're starting to buy Ray Charles and Aretha Franklin and Sam Cooke. And like Boogaloo and moment R&B or organ soul jazz sold fairly well in black neighborhoods, but nothing of the composed, arranged edges of avant really sold in the black neighborhoods at all. Those were for white hipsters on Vespas going to school in Boise. You know, I'm from Vermont, but I'm out here in Boise getting my degree in forestry. I love John Coltrane. But Coltrane's body of work is just so immense. It's such a great introduction point. And the man himself is so noble and so full of integrity and doesn't really have some of the ugly character traits of the Miles Davises, the drug addictions of the Charlie Parkers and the thievery. There's a lot of vice and debauchery and crooked ways in the world of jazz. And Coltrane, for the most part, seems to be a very noble, integral, honest musician in love with his craft above all things. And it even seems to come ahead of women and sex. His art really drove him. And like I said, he went to the cross almost, where he just knew he was dying, his health was deteriorating, and he just continued to fight and play through the darkness. And that's what music's for. And that makes that music powerful and charged. And even people who don't have insight into what's fueling it connect with it and feel there's an energy to it. The sincerity of art always connects people, even if they don't know why or how. It just has a guttural necessity. Like, this feels important. And again, there's a lot of reasons, but for me, he's number one. And it wasn't a landslide by any means. I debated Parker and Hawkins both, and Lester and Rollins are both equally talented, and talent was never the issue. You know, all these cats can play. But that wraps up my top 100. It's been a pretty exhausting 4 weeks of compiling all this stuff. I'm sure you're here, it's tired of me saying it, but I'm happy to be done with it. You know what I mean? I got all the records back pretty much on the shelves now. It's been a lot of the room being a mess. My OCD didn't love it. At the same time, it was fun to see the collection at work like it was and being utilized like my hip-hop and funk records were for years as a DJ. To see my jazz being a tool that I'm using to hopefully make a living on, that's encouraging and exciting, and that's where my heart is. And like I've said a couple times, I'm really pretty clear that this is what I want to do. This feels what I should be doing, and many people have kind of confirmed that. And so, again, thanks to everybody. I hope you all enjoyed this 100 greatest saxophones and comparing it to the 50 great white saxophones. And if you have the time, tell me what percentage of the black guys did you know by name versus what percentage of the white guys. And I'm going to guess the white guys are around 20% for most casual jazz fans. I'm going to guess the black guys are around 65%. A lot more of these guys have risen to fame through posterity and lived rather anonymous, broke careers as jazz musicians, but have become the icons of today. So it's nice to see that history does correct some mistakes sometimes. I'm the Jazz Shepherd. check out my Jazz Journal. Volume 2 is coming out soon on the Patreon subscription basis. There's some great articles from my friend Jean-Michel, Adam Linz, my friend Wolfgang Pointer. It's going to be a great episode. It's going to be some great content for me as well on the great drummers of this era. Y'all be safe. Peace.